so much for asking me to do this. I was really excited when I got the invitation because, as some of you all know, I love talking about the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative and what we do here, specifically at my court in Summit County, Ohio, in Akron. I work for Judge Linda Tucci Teodosio, and we do have a national reputation in Summit County of being progressive and leaders in the juvenile justice reform movement across the country. So I'm thrilled to be here. I couldn't do this without my good friend Corey Shreve, who I'm going to introduce. Corey is the State Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative Administrator with the Ohio Department of Youth Services, and I'll let him tell you a little bit about himself. But you know, in interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce Corey. And but before I do that, I'm just curious, how many people have ever heard of JDAI or might be in a JDAI county? Because there are 17 jurisdictions in the state of Ohio. So I'm hoping some folks, a few, okay. And I told Corey I was really excited about having the opportunity to do this because I know there aren't a lot of juvenile justice people typically on these calls. So we hope we're reaching some new folks in the audience. So Corey, up to you. I cannot hear Corey.
I can't either.
Okay, it always helps when you unmute yourself. This is my first time using technology or Zoom. My name is Corey Shreve. As Lisa said, I'm the State JDI Administrator with the Ohio Department of Youth Services. So I'm really looking forward to speaking with everyone. In my previous life, I worked at the county level in the juvenile detention services. So I've worked with many community partners over the years. So I really am excited to talk to you about what we're doing with JDI in Ohio. So with that said, I'll go ahead and kick it off. That sounds good. So I already broke a rule and I use JDAI. So that stands for the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative. And I'm going to use JDAI because I can't help myself. But it is the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative. It's a juvenile.
Hey, Corey, let me jump in here and say you're allowed to talk about your program. That's why we invited you in. We're not allowed to list specific programs for cases once we're talking about cases.
Oh, no, I was just trying not to use the acronyms and the lingo that way. So no specific cases coming out of me for sure. But JDI is a juvenile justice system reform process that really enables us to safely reduce the reliance on secure detention while also stimulating other improvements that strengthen our system results. We want to try to increase fairness. We want to use public resources more effectively. The Annie Casey Foundation is who introduced us to the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. JDI began in the 90s in 5 jurisdictions as a pilot project. Some of you may remember the 1990s, the age of the super predator, mass incarceration, juvenile detention centers were despair conditions, overcrowded, kids sleeping on mats on floors. So that's kind of how Casey got into the juvenile justice arena. But Casey, which most of you are probably familiar with, is one of the largest private foundations in the country that's dedicated to working with disadvantaged children. The founder is Jim Casey. He was the eldest of his siblings. You guys might have gotten a notification while I'm talking about him right now on Blink, through Ring, through Amazon. He is the founder of UPS. So his messenger service that he started in Seattle to help support his family turned into a multi-billion-dollar business that we all, I think even more now than ever, have relied on.
Okay, so this is what JDAI looks like in Ohio. The Casey Foundation came to Ohio in 2009, and they went to the Ohio Department of Youth Services and said, hey, Ohio, we want you guys to be a JDAI state. So in turn, the Ohio Department of Youth Services went to the 6 biggest counties in the state, which are all listed there to the left of your screen, except for Hamilton. So they went to all 5 of the big ones in Hamilton and said, hey, guys, if we do this, if we join JDAI and take a look at our detention centers and how we're using them, we could affect, what was it, Corey, 44%, I think, of the detention beds in the entire state of Ohio. From those 6 big counties. So 5 of us jumped on board right away. We wanted to do better. We wanted to learn. We wanted to make sure we were holding the right kids. But more importantly, we wanted to make sure we weren't making matters worse, because Corey alluded to the fact, you know, that the detention population, the juvenile justice system as a whole, we've really taken a really hard inward look at ourselves through this initiative, through JDAI. And the intent is to make sure what we're doing meets best practices. And more importantly, we're not making matters worse. So we have all this research now. The juvenile justice field has all this research since brain development scanning started 30 or 40 years ago. We have 30 years worth of research. And what we know now that we didn't know before is if we overprogram, over-respond, overreact, if you will, to a child who's brought to our attention, we ultimately are making matters worse and increasing the likelihood that they will recidivate. We know this now. So that's why we take such a hard look at our practices. You really have to have strong judicial leadership to be a part of this initiative, because you have to be able to look at yourself and say, okay, we don't have this right. We got to do better over here. And I am fortunate in Summit County. I work for that judge. I work for a judge, Teodosio, whose mantra is, we got to do better today than we did yesterday. So these 5 counties over here in 2009, we jumped right on board. It has grown to 2020. Now there are 17 sites in the state of Ohio. So it really, if it didn't work, we wouldn't grow so fast. And Corey, as the state administrator, he's got counties calling him wanting to participate, because we've done made such positive impacts on our community. I always start out my presentation when I do a JDAI training, which I do a lot. I always start out by saying, this ain't your mama's juvenile justice system anymore. You know, the old thinking of, let's lock them up until they learn their lesson. We know now that that doesn't work. So I still spend a lot of my time every week communicating what JDAI is, talking about the research. And don't you hate that guy that always is quoting your research? I hate that guy. But we know now what works, but again, more importantly, what doesn't work for kids.
Absolutely. So in 2020, we're reaching 70% of kids that could be impacted by the juvenile justice system in Ohio. And that's something as a state scale site that we wanted to continue to do. We want to keep growing this initiative. And what we know is from our first 5 counties, we have used data to drive this process. So people want to get on board because of those first 5 counties and the work they've done and the foundation we've built in Ohio. So currently, we're over 30 years into this initiative. There's 40 states and over 300 jurisdictions that participate in the JDI initiative worldwide. So Ohio, we have a state leadership committee comprised of our judicial leaderships and our state partners, and we created a mission statement. And our whole goal is that all youth subjected to detention be treated equitably, to reduce involvement in the juvenile justice system through community reinvestment programs and transformational opportunities, while maintaining public safety and victim restoration. One of the things that we really focus on with our courts as we start, there has to be a vision and a mission of the court that align with the JDI initiative. And one of the first things we do is create a purpose of detention, because it is the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative. And if we don't have a purpose of detention, everybody wants to use it as the dumping ground. From a JDI perspective, the purpose of detention is to ensure public safety and safe return for court. Those are the only two things. And you can look at Ohio law and you'll hear people talk a lot about, and I'll get into this a little bit more, but the detention should not be used for the safety of a child, because it's not the safest place we can put a child. It should be for the safety of the public. And then we have to have purpose around why we divert kids, why we place a kid on probation, or why we use any program to serve our youth. So there are dangers when you place a kid in detention. And I would be remiss not to talk about it with you all, because often I hear, hey, this kid needs to come here because we don't have any place to put him. Well, this isn't the place to put him for a couple of reasons. And when we started this initiative, we knew that we needed to take a hard look at the data to tell us what kids are we keeping in juvenile detention. What we found out, and you can see from the slide, we were only detaining 24% of violent persons, and let's say youth, right? 76% were for other reasons, most of which would be something as simple as a status offense. In Ohio, we're infamous for this. Truancy was one of the main reasons kids were placed in detention, running away. And then one other thing we found out, the kids were sitting in our detention centers and filling up detention centers for what we call technical violations, but a rule violation. So an example might be a youth placed on probation, and they're not attending their counseling sessions, or they're not listening to their parents. They would get a rule violation, which in Ohio is a violation of a valid court order, and a kid can spend up to 90 days in detention. What we know about placing a kid in detention, when I talked about it not being safe, detention directors, the staff, they try to do the best they possibly can. But once a kid steps foot in a juvenile detention center, they're 4 times more likely to hurt themselves inside detention than they are outside of it. They're actually pre-adjudication, or before they have pled to their charge, if they're placed in detention on the front end, they're 3 times more likely to be found guilty and incarcerated. They're 42% more likely to use illicit drugs. And this is the funny one for me. I always used to like when someone would call and say, hey, I picked up a kid, we're bringing him in, Corey. I say, okay, where'd you get him? We got him for a probation violation for truancy. And I'd always ask, where are they coming from? School. Okay. 59% more likely to drop out of school. So these are staggering statistics that we really looked at early on. Now that we have drastically reduced our detention population, we're focusing in several other areas. We did this by using a blueprint, right? A playbook for implementing this initiative. The first part of that is collaboration. We had to bring the right system partners together in each community to make decisions on behalf of our youth, right? And I always say this, the next one that I think is so important, and you heard me mention this, is data-driven decisions. A lot of times we say we talk about, we think, we feel, but we don't always look at the data. And I always use this example. I feel like I'm only 215 pounds till I step on the scale at 4:30 this morning, and it's not 215 pounds, right? We need data to tell us where to go next. We have to create objective tools, admission tools, to decide what kids truly need programs. And Lisa alluded to this in the beginning. Sometimes we want to over-program and fix kids' problems and fix people's problems when we're good at it, but we're not that good at it. We have to educate people and let people know that some of these kids just need the opportunity to age out. Aging out is going to be the number one way they're going to eliminate some of these behaviors and issues. Also, we have to give judges and magistrates and our partners alternatives to detention. And so Ohio has done a great job creating reception centers, assessment centers, partnering with different agencies to find alternatives for kids. We want to also not keep kids for too long. We want to get them through. So we have to look at case processing. We also have to look at these things from an equity standpoint. We're asking parents who are usually in our lower socioeconomic status, their financial means aren't there to show up for court and take an entire day off and then come back again, or a kid's case gets postponed for 90 days. And then where is that lesson learned? And then our special detention cases we talked about, those technical violations. And we want to implement all of these 8 core strategies with reducing racial and ethnic disparities in our systems. And then the last one is the conditions of confinement. Everybody who starts this project is like, Corey, we need to get our detention directors on board for this. This is really important. Well, the number one way we impact conditions of confinement is we significantly reduce population. So it's more on the front end of the system than it is on the back end of the system.
Okay, so the beginning of it was all the traditional JDI work I referred to it is all pre-adjudicated kids. We are looking at the population of the kids sitting in our detention centers that haven't been convicted of their crimes yet. In the juvenile world, we call it adjudicated of their offense or adjudicated of their charge. So that's where JDI started. Why are all these kids sitting in detention centers across the country and they haven't even been adjudicated yet? What's wrong with that picture? If they were adults, if they were maybe a few months or a few years older, they'd be in adult court, they'd sign a signature bond, they'd go home and they'd come back when it was time for their hearing. We don't have that luxury with kids in the juvenile justice system. So we really took a hard look at the kids in our detention centers that hadn't been adjudicated yet. We thought we had a pretty good handle on what we were doing in Summit County, but what we found was we had Dr. Jeff Kretschmar come in, our good friend Jeff came in and did detention utilization study for us and looked at how we were using our detention center. Alarmingly, what we found is 50% of the kids that we had held in our detention center that year, 50% of them were in detention for a domestic violence charge. Now, again, I don't advocate for kids beating each other up or hitting a parent, but I grew up with 3 brothers. We got in fights a lot, but my parents never called the police on me and I never ended up in jail for it. So that was the front end of the work. Then the work shifted a little bit, and the Casey Foundation is doing a lot of work now with what we call deep end sites. So the deep end of the system is the opposite end of the spectrum. The kids that are being held in detention centers that are at highest risk for being removed from their home, kids at highest risk for placement. We want those kids to stay in the community and be treated in the community because their outcomes are better. We all know that. So the deep end sites, there are only 13 jurisdictions in the entire country that are deep end sites. Summit County is a deep end site. 3 of the 13 jurisdictions are in the state of Ohio. So congratulations, Ohio. Kudos to you. 3 of those sites in the country are right here in Ohio. It's Summit County, Franklin County, and Franklin County, Summit County, and Lucas County. Sorry, I kind of lapsed there. So that's what the deep end work is all about. And the work is all focused on reducing kids as a whole in our system, but especially youth of color, because that's the one thing that none of us have gotten right yet in the country. We all are reporting disproportionate numbers of kids of color in our systems. There's a lot going on this slide, and I don't feel like I have the time to explain it all, but this is just a snapshot of what the work looks like in Summit County. Some of the reductions that we've experienced. So, you know, we have a lot to be proud of, and our community partners, you know, sometimes it takes me a little bit more time than I'd like to explain JDI and explain that it's not negatively impacting our communities. We're doing all this work and the village isn't burning, if you will. Our delinquency filings at the court are down over 70% since we started this work, which is how we know it's working. There aren't more kids coming into our system. There are less kids coming into our system.
And with that said, too, you know, the reductions have been ever present. You know, roughly 50% of admission reduction in our juvenile detention centers. In the early 2000s, in the Department of Youth Services, we had 11 facilities and roughly 2,800 kids in our institutions every day. That has been reduced down to 3 institutions and roughly 430 youth on any given day. That's including our community partners, our alternative placements that we use for our youth. So our felony filings are down, our delinquency filings are down. And I credit a lot of this to the great work that our counties are doing with their partners, you know, and one of the ways we're able to do that is through our reclaim funding that goes out to the different counties. And I have to say this, that reclaim impacts not only large counties, but small counties. It's very flexible in how it can be spent and used to serve kids and partner with child serving agencies. So this has played a critical role in how JDI has moved across and how we can incentivize positive youth development and thinking about serving kids in a different way through a strength-based approach. We're really focused on diversion. That's one of the keys for us right now is how do we divert kids? How do we engage community partners? Because a lot of this work we want to give away. We don't want a kid to have to come to court to get service. We want them to be able to go somewhere in the community and get connected with the things they need. So also, I know I'm long-winded, so I need to speed it up here, but there is so much information out there. We're willing to have conversations with anyone who would want to listen to us. We're willing to partner. We're willing to learn. And one of the places you can find a ton of information is on jdiconnect.org. You create a simple profile, and it's a national database, kind of like your Facebook for juvenile justice reform. So there are folks talking about everything from detention to probation to diversion to counseling. There's so many things that are going on there. Please take some time to check that out. But if you would have any questions for us, we'll share the presentation, but also feel free to email us. And we really just appreciate your time and the work that you all do. I know you have no easy task in front of you with the cases you're going to hear this afternoon. So thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. It's hard